This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way.
Ho! Greetings, Bucketheads. Mavar Tagar. Welcome to our 266 deaths. Ooh boy, desperately seeking Sith Lords episode of Mando Vision. I'm your host, Nargai Tom, and thank you so much for checking out this small, independent Star Wars podcast. We're so glad you're here. Remember, the best way to reach out to us is on the socials. Hit us up at Mando_Vision on Twitter /X and Instagram. Email the show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share this show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. All right, Bucketheads, we are back. It is time for the season finale of Star Wars The Acolyte. It is upon us. And once again, as has been the case with just about every episode of this series, it is Mandovision After Dark. We are living after midnight, rocking to the dawn, but mostly because I've already recorded this podcast one time, and there was a complete audio failure at the end of it. So here I am once again, trying my best to remember all the amazing, salient points that I had made in that first episode. I mean, I could release what I recorded. It's got so much static. It's so annoying to listen to. And I worked so hard to try and get that static out of there, and I just couldn't make it happen. So we're doing a round two. We're giving it another go, and we're going to see how we do this time around. All right, Bucketheads, though, let's talk a little bit. Let's go ahead and get things out there right off the bat. You know how I have been feeling about this show since the jump. It's kind of a mixed bag. I've been more up on it than down, but it's been a mixed bag of a series. That being said, the season finale kind of stays true to that form for me. But go ahead, Disney. Go ahead, Lucasfilm. Renew this for a season 2, because I definitely believe that in this day and age of highly competitive television, that you need to give your creators a little bit of rope, so they can tell the story that they want to tell in the proper amount of time that they need to tell it. Now, again, I'm not an economist. I don't know how these things work. I don't know anything about budgets. I don't, again, that's not my prerogative. But I'm here for good Star Wars and good television. We got a lot out of this series. Some things that fans will agree with, some things that fans don't. But I think at the very least, we got a compelling story, some interesting mysteries, and whether you loved it or hated it, you wanted to get those answers to the show. So why not renew for season 2? Give Leslie Headland and her team a chance to tell their story to completion. Whether that's whether you make them finish it in season 2 or you give them a little bit more runway for a third season. I think that if Disney and Star Wars and Lucasfilm are going to continue to push forward in this a streaming world that we now find ourselves in, they need to be able to bring in creators and tell them that, hey, we're going to give you everything you need to tell the story that you want to tell in the Star Wars universe. We're not going to pull the rug out from under you if the internet decides that they don't like it. You get to tell your story. That's the deal. I'd like that very much to be what they do at Lucasfilm. But again, it's not my money, so no one's asking me for my opinion on that particular matter. But that being said, I do want to get into the final episode of Star Wars The Acolyte. And even now, after midnight as we record this episode for the second time, which is just funny for me to even think about, because this has been happening a lot lately. Initially, as when we recorded it, so one thing has changed since the first time I recorded the episode. It seems now that episode 8 of Star Wars: The Acolyte now has a title. So let's go ahead and get into it. Let's do the particulars. This is this episode of Star Wars Mando Vision is all about Star Wars: The Acolyte, Season 1, Episode 8, The Acolyte. Crazy. Directed by Jason Micallef. Jesus, I said it better the first time. Written by him and directed by Hannah Lee Culpepper. Our primary cast for this week's episode. Once again returning, we have Amandla Stenberg, Lee Jung-jae, Manny Jacinto, Rebecca Henderson, David Harewood, and Harry Trevelyan. I probably said that name wrong too. Our plot for this episode's confrontation and revelation await. So let's go ahead. Let's dive into the episode. You know what that means, my friends. It's time. Strap on your buckets. Let's go.
This is the way.
So I think it's fair to say at this point, as we reach the conclusion of this first season for The Acolyte, that it's been somewhat of a divisive show. And I think that is fair in many, many regards. I don't think everyone's opinion for not liking the show has been reasonable, well thought out, or fair. But again, I can understand by and large why some people are into this show, why some people are not. And it's made for interesting conversation with my friend group who is into Star Wars. And I can tell you right off the jump that some of the more casual friends that I have that are into Star Wars not digging the whole Jedi as bad guys kind of vibe that most of these episodes are giving off. Well, they're not going to enjoy this episode any better, because this episode, by and large, very much leans into the idea that the Jedi are the bad guys. They're doing bad things. They made bad choices. They are covering up crimes they committed. It's optically speaking, it's not a good time to be in the Jedi Order. But one of the things we need to remember is that this is a interesting tipping point sort of period for the Jedi. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to a certain aspect of this episode. Because, again, people are ripping on the choices of the Jedi at this point. Twitter in particular has been fairly harsh. A lot of the YouTube vloggers fairly harsh on the episode and the show in general. But there's something I don't think they're accounting for. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to it, as we kind of move through some of the elements of this episode that I want to talk about. So when we join this episode, we're sort of picking up where we left off in episode 6 with Osha putting on the stranger's helmet and taking with her what she has, much like the Force Cave on Dagobah. You take in there only what you bring. So she's in the helmet. We hear her breathing, and then her breathing becomes rapid and somewhat haggard, and we realize that she's having a Force vision. We see Chimere. For unexplained reasons, his eyes go black. The background around him becomes blue as he attempts to sort of almost like pierce the veil of the Force to help remove the helmet from Moshe's head. And when she does, she tells us about a vision that she's had of May killing Master Soul with a lightsaber in her hand, but killing him with an outstretched hand that doesn't have a lightsaber in it. We'll get to that. We'll talk about that some more. But what's interesting, in my opinion, of this episode in particular is it's sort of the completion of what began 2 episodes ago, maybe even technically 3 episodes ago, at the end of episode 5, which is sort of the reversal of fortune for all of our characters, where they are changing alliances, changing allegiances, changing their perception, their perspective on things. Uh, this show started with May as the aggressor, seeking revenge and trying to avenge the death of her family, the death of her mother, against the four Jedi who attacked and attempted to abduct her from Brendok. Now, after Soul's confession to her of what occurred on Brendok, she doesn't want vengeance any longer. She doesn't want Soul's head on a pike in front of the Jedi Temple. She wants him to stand before the Senate, to stand before the Jedi Council, and admit his crimes. This is a reversal of where she was when we started the show. That will change. For Osha's opinion on all this will change later in the episode as well, where she now takes on the stance of vengeance and becoming the dark harbinger of things to come, and the avenging angel for her mother and for her coven, because of the lies and the duplicitousness of Soul and the Jedi. It's interesting in many fashions, and again, there's a lot of elements of that reversal, that sort of swapping of positions. Pip becoming May's droid in this episode, obviously paired up with the partnership that Osha strikes up with Chimere, as opposed to May and Chimere in the beginning of the series. So a lot going on here in regards to that. I want to go back to the vision, because obviously it pays out big time at the end of the episode. Right now, at the beginning, Osha's the one having the vision, believes it's May that's killing Soul with her hand outstretched, and in the other hand, a lightsaber that's not been activated. As we will find out, this is another role reversal as well, because it's now Osha wearing the dark Sith-like clothing, and May wearing the light colors, the sort of what they call it, the observer uniform of white versus black. We're switching spots now from where we were a couple of episodes ago. Again, that's just classic storytelling right there. The symbolism, we all understand it. It's right there. But what May is, what Osha is actually seeing is a vision of her future, of her killing Soul, of her fulfilling the prophecy of killing a Jedi without a weapon, and using the patented Darth Vader Force choke to do it. Feel about that as you will. But yeah, kind of like, again, we're not there yet, but I respected Osha's technique, because she didn't go full on Vader, just like crush the windpipe kind of thing. Like, she was like, no, you're gonna look me in the eyes, Master Soul, while I choke you out and take the life from you. Very, very different vibe from what we get. What else is going on in this episode? On the ship, again, we talked about Pip now being May's droid, helps free her from the restraints on the med bed that Soul has her tied to, as he sort of relays the story of what happened on Brendok. But that's not enough for May. She's not going with Soul. She's on her own. She's gonna do her own thing, and we get a little bit of a space pursuit as May breaks away. Basil, for some reason, sabotages Soul's ship. Is it because he overheard Soul's confession and now is on May's side of things? It's a little unclear. It's a little vague for his motivations. But our characters crash on Brendok, and we're gonna end this show where everything started on Brendok 16 years ago. It makes sense. It's circular. It ties it all together. I don't think any of us are surprised that Brendok was the end of this sort of journey for these characters. It ties it all together. It makes the most sense. Meanwhile, back on Coruscant, because apparently once Soul ditched them, Vernestra and her Jedi left Kofar and just went home. How much time has gone on between these episodes? Like, my goodness. It feels like there probably wasn't enough time to go from Kofar back to Coruscant, back into hot pursuit of Soul. But for reasons that time dilation cannot explain, Vernestra is back on Coruscant, and she's having a fascinating meeting with Senator Raincourt. Senator Raincourt is leading the charge to have more oversight of the Jedi, wants to sort of investigate what they're up to, kind of restrict the autonomy that the Jedi have had up to this point. And this is one of the elements of the show that I wanted to talk about a little bit in more detail, because I think a lot of people are sort of glossing over specific elements of this time period. And while in the episode we haven't quite gotten to the moment where Kymir and Osha are leaving the planet that's definitely not Octo, to go to Brendok and pursue Sol and May and everybody, and we get that appearance. We get that sort of, again, is it fan servicey or is it tying it all together? That appearance of Darth Plagueis the Wise peering around the corner at the two Sith apprentices that he will probably be manipulating soon. Yes, it's a nice moment to reveal that the stranger is with Plagueis, that Plagueis now has a live action appearance in canon. But what's important about that appearance is also those of us who know the lore, who know the canon, who have been paying attention to the things that go on in the background. You know, if you read the Bane books, if you read the Darth Plagueis novel, the Sith are working behind the scenes to destabilize the Jedi, to erode their base of support in the galaxy. So the scene between Vernestra and Senator Raincourt is very significant because it's playing into the hands of the Sith, and where ultimately the Jedi find themselves 100 years from now when the Clone Wars begin. This is classic manipulation of the Sith, pulling the strings, being the puppet masters. Now, again, I'm not saying that Raincourt directly knows that he is a puppet of the Sith, that he's a pawn in some game between the Jedi and the Sith. Probably far from it. But he became a political candidate of interest to the Sith because of his belief that the Jedi are I forget the exact words he uses, but he basically refers to them as a sort of a crazy force cult that has no oversight and just seems to have a lot of public opinion in their favor currently, but that doesn't mean they've earned that public favor. So he's sort of like this anti-Jedi guy that the Sith have probably propped up and put into a position of power to help put the Jedi in check, to have more oversight, to strip away their autonomy, and to erode the base of support that they have in the public eye of the galaxy. I think it's brilliant. I think it's fantastic. This is one of those elements that I really enjoy. I back in the first episode of the show, I remember applauding the fact that we weren't getting too much into the politics. But when you're going to bring in Plagueis, when you're going to bring in a character like Vernestra, who seems hell-bent on making sure that the Senate doesn't have any sway over the Jedi, you have to suss these things out and realize the connective tissue that is in there in the mythology already. And I think that's something that's getting glossed over by a lot of people when they're breaking these down. So remember that these politicians, again, they may think they're acting independently, but they're there for a reason. The Sith have been maneuvering senators in and out of the Senate, maneuvering political bills and all the different things they can to levy against the Jedi. So Raincourt, I was mixing up David Harewood's name and Raincourt's name, sorry. But yeah, Senator Raincourt believes he's doing all of these great, wonderful things for the benefit of the galaxy, but it's actually for the benefit of the Sith. He is an unwitting pawn of Darth Plagueis the Wise. Remember that when you watch the scene. It changes a lot of things that we need to understand about why Vernestra's doing what she's doing, which again is wrong, but she's doing it because she feels, I think whether subconsciously or not, she feels the Jedi are under attack from the politicians, that they are under attack and in danger of becoming a tool of the Republic, which is very much what they are in the time of the prequels. So it is of significance. So going back Back to Brendok. Sol has crashed there. He's returned to the scene of the crime. And for reasons that I'm not quite clear on, he decides to reactivate his transponder so that the Jedi can track him to Brendok. Does he know he's going to need help? Perhaps. But he doesn't allude to it by any stretch. But now all of a sudden, he wants the Jedi to find him. He wants them to come there. And I think it has to do with his plan to, now that May is alive, he can prove that there is a vergence in the Force on Brendok, and that will allow him to justify his actions. It's important to note that prior to this, when still on the ship, Sol wanted to prove the vergence, and he still thinks that the Jedi intervention was the right thing to do on Brendok, taking the girls away from their family, taking the girls away from the coven of Force Witches was the right thing to do. So Sol's really dug his heels on this particular instance. And again, over the course of the series, I think our understanding of Sol has changed, but I don't think our opinion of him as a good man has changed. He's a good man who made a bad choice and compounded it with several more on top of it, and then the idea of lying about it for a really, really, really long time. Just it's one of those things that's like it's got away from him, but he's clearly racked by the guilt, just like the other three Jedi involved in the incident on Brendok are as well. It changed and affected them all dramatically. So here, as Sol returns to Witch Mountain, to the scene of the crime, if you will, he's haunted. He's reliving his ghosts as he walks these corridors, where he was 16 years ago, when the most horrible thing in his life was committed, and much of it at his hands. But he's still in denial about a fair amount of it, about sort of the role he played in it, and sort of like how he, the witches may have technically fired first, but like Sol is the one who escalated things, if you will, and took it to another level, specifically by killing Mother Anastasia, as it were. And that's going to come back and get him here in a little bit. But in the meantime, Chimere and Osha have arrived on the planet, and Chimere is the first to encounter Sol. And we get another great lightsaber battle here between the Stranger, between Sol. And I can't help but commend the lightsaber fights in this series. I think they've been stellar. I think they've been top-notch, really well executed. I love the inclusion of martial arts and hand-to-hand combat and a lot of these things. I've enjoyed the insanely unique style that the Stranger has incorporated into his lightsaber combat techniques. I find it all visually fascinating. It's been one of my favorite elements of the show overall. So give me more of that. Then in the meantime, we have May and Osha reuniting in their burned out husk of a bedroom, and they are conversing, trying to connect. But again, they've switched places at this point on their perspectives on things. Again, that a certain point of view. Now everyone's point of view has been shifted by the information they have, by the information they don't have. So May and Osha get into conflict, and what we see between them is hand-to-hand combat, but hand-to-hand combat where each of them is able to anticipate and respond and block the others. It's like fighting in a mirror. It is an indication of revelations to come, which is that, in fact, as Sol will tell us shortly, that May and Osha are not sisters. They are not twins. They are, in fact, the same person in two bodies. So it's almost like a yin and yang kind of element here, where one, it's almost, it's dangerous for me to say this because I don't have quite the understanding for it. We may find out in subsequent interviews, now that the show is over, a little bit more about this, but it feels like they're almost a yin and a yang, so that when one person feels one way, the other one is going to feel the other way. Now, is it that way 100% of the time, guaranteed? No, not so much. But that feels like what they're going for in this episode, that they're sort of like these diametric opposites, that they can't ever be on the same page. And one of them is dark, the other is light. When one of them is light, the other is dark. Perhaps that's something to explore more if there is another season of the series. But for now, again, that role reversal happens, and they're in combat with each other. And I'll be honest, I don't quite remember how the combat with them ends, but there is a moment when the stranger and Soul are fighting, and again, it's a great fight, and Soul pulls off a sweet, sweet move where I thought he maybe had cut the stranger in half, but instead he had severed his lightsaber. So Chimera removes his helmet and turns around to find Soul's lightsaber blade at his neck, ready to go. But May shows up and takes Soul's lightsaber away from him, robbing him of the ability to end the threat of the Sith Lord, potential Sith Lord, and force a confession, basically. Like, it's time to talk. It's time to lay it all out there. And this is when Soul says what he says about them not being sisters, not being twins, being the same person. But it also is when May gets Soul to finally admit to killing their mother, to killing Mother Anastasia. And Osha is in the wings waiting to hear that. And despite his protestations, despite his attempted justifications, he finally owns up to the fact that, yes, he made a terrible mistake and he killed her mother. Osha does not react well. Osha does not take this well. This is, again, more of that change of perspective that we talked about. May has gone from the one seeking vengeance to now wanting Soul to stand before the council, to stand before the Senate and confess his crimes and pay the price for them in the justice system. May is the one being rational and logical now. She's no longer the evil twin. She's the level-headed one. Osha, on the other hand, who has now admitted to May that she could never become a Jedi because she could never get over her negative feelings that she had about what happened on Brendok all those years ago, the death of her family, the fire that her sister started. Now is leaning into those negative emotions the way Chimera sort of was poking and prodding her to several episodes ago. And so her hearing Soul's confession angers her. It ignites the passion in her in a negative way once again. And so now she comes out and Soul attempts to explain, attempts to justify. But being lied to for so long, Osha's reaction is understandable to a degree. Again, I can understand why a lot of people will not like this show and will not like this episode because it wants us to also, as an audience, it wants us to reverse course. It wants us to now sympathize and understand the plight of the Sith and vilify the Jedi for their role in everything. And I think that's dangerous to do on a show where your audience is so big and so large. I think it's an interesting concept. I think it's an interesting idea. I think they need to tread very, very carefully. Again, this is already a divisive show. I hope Kathy Kennedy and Leslie Hanlon get the opportunity to tell this story to its completion because I'd like to see where it goes. But this is a dangerous thing to put your audience in a place where they are now trying to sympathize and understand and potentially root for the bad guys. Like, this is sort of a crazy idea in Star Wars, which has always been a very light and dark show, a very black and white show. Despite the fact that the universe is full of gray, when it comes to who you're rooting for, it's been very easy to pick from. So now we get to the point where Osha has now recovered Soul's lightsaber that was taken away from him by May and thrown away. She's picked it up. She's getting angry, expressing her emotions, her rage, her negative feelings, anger, hatred, despair, all these negative things that lead to the dark side. And what we get to see is something we've not seen in live action before either, which is her bleeding a kyber crystal in live action as she's expressing these emotions. But she keeps that lightsaber at her side. And what does she do? She reaches out her other hand and she begins to choke Master Soul with the Force, Vader style, but far less aggressive, far less just crush the windpipe and get it over with. Just more like, look me in the eyes as I'm taking the life from you. It's very cruel in a way, and as surprised as Soul is, I think he seems to understand too. One of his like dying words to her is like, "It's okay." Like, I think Soul to an extent accepts his fate for the role he played in shaping this young girl, despite the fact that it did not go the way that he wanted it to. It did not go the way he envisioned it all going. But that's par for the course. Ever since Brendok 16 years ago, nothing's gone the way it was supposed to go. That liberation, rescuing of these children didn't go the way it was supposed to. The training of Osha didn't go the way it was supposed to. The pursuit of May, who started killing the Jedi Masters involved in Brendok, didn't go the way it was supposed to. So this is kind of par for the course, and I think Soul deep down realizes that this is the price that he must ultimately pay for what he did. And it's sad. It's tragic because, again, I don't think Soul is a bad man by any stretch. Bad decisions were made, and the price had to be paid. And again, he thought he could prove this vengeance. He thought he could prove and justify the actions of the Jedi on Brendok 16 years ago by bringing Vernestra and these other knights there to show them. But it was for naught. Again, another choice gone horribly wrong, not the way he wanted it to go. And so the Jedi arrive. Vernestra arrives, and as I said before, just when Chimere thought he was going to be killed, he had removed his helmet to look Soul in the eyes. And now that Vernestra has set foot on the planet, Vernestra knows that he's there. And we get confirmation of what we suspected on this podcast, and many others as well, that Chimere is in fact the former Padawan apprentice of Vernestra Rwoh, as the scars indicated on the back of his body. So now Vernestra knows that he's there. He's part of it. She thinks he was dead, but obviously she is also aware that he turned to the dark side, that he had fallen from grace. So she keeps that to herself. Because now Vernestra, who has taken it upon herself to be the savior of the Order, the keeper of all their dark secrets, again, fitting Soul for the frame a couple episodes ago, gets her wish when she arrives at Witch Mountain and finds Soul dead on the scene and no one else around. Again, Jedi in pursuit, but they haven't seen Chimere, they haven't seen May, they haven't seen Osha. And the girls run. They reunite with each other under that tree that we saw them with as children. They kind of have their moment to each other. But their roles have been reversed. Osha is going to go with Chimere, and that will save her life. Chimere will not kill May now. And on top of that, Chimere is going to wipe her memory so that May can't lead the Jedi to Chimere or Osha moving forward. And it works. The girls have a nice partying moment with each other. But again, their story isn't as compelling as I want it to be. So, it's as nice a moment as it was. I just kind of wasn't into it. It's fine. It did what it's supposed to do. They're saying that little nursery rhyme that they have for each other, that neither one of them knows who made it up. And then May forgets it. She doesn't know how to end it because Chimere's wiped her memory. And we find out that Chimere's wiped her memory back to the night of the fire, the night of what happened on Brendok with the Jedi. Eventually, May is recovered by the Jedi. Osha and Chimere have made their escape. And that's kind of it. Vern takes May back to Coruscant. This is where we find out that May's memory is gone, is trashed. Vernestra promises that the Jedi have done this girl wrong and that she will try and make up for it. But when meeting with the senators, she is more than happy to hang this all on Soul. And there is a nice moment between the dead body of Soul and Vernestra where she apologizes to his corpse, knowing what she's going to have to do to try and get these senators off the Jedi's back, to get these senators out of intervening in Jedi business. For better or worse, depends on how you look at it, right? Like, is government oversight of the Jedi appropriate? or not? Well, how do you feel about it? Should the Jedi have full-on autonomy to do whatever they want in the galaxy? Seems dangerous, but who wants to support? Who wants the government in their business either? So, it goes a lot of different ways. Vern clearly not a fan of the idea of government oversight, of government intervening and telling the Jedi when and where they can go and be dispatched to do Jedi things. Leans into this cover-up, frames, or doesn't even have to frame Sol, but makes him the scapegoat. Sol returned to Brendok to kill himself in an effort to amend the crimes he committed 16 years ago, and that's why he killed Indira and Kalnaka and Torbin and the Jedi who tried to pursue him on Kofar. It is an unfortunate end for his legacy, Sol's legacy, now forever tarnished, forever tainted as a rogue Jedi, someone who'd fallen from grace. And Vernesser's more than willing to put that on him if it keeps the Senate out of Jedi affairs. And that only compounds things, only makes things worse. But Vernesser has a plan for May, and it involves using her to help find Chimere. Even though she has no memory of being with him, she knows enough from Sol's reports to realize that the girl might be able to lead her to her former apprentice, who's gone to the dark side, who she knows is tangled up in this somehow, some way now. And she decides that it's time to loop in the one Jedi Master that we know is there, has always been there, Master Yoda. The appearance we've been all waiting for, because we knew he's in the era of the High Republic. We knew he was on the Council and leading the way forward. And that is where our season ends, with Vanessa Rowe approaching Master Yoda for his guidance, his wisdom on what to do next. And then on the planet that's definitely not Octo, Chimere, Osha, holding hands, sharing a lightsaber, looking at the sea, and then I can only imagine Pelagius being a creep and peering around another rock, looking at them both, and figuring out how he's going to manipulate these two fools into doing the things he needs them to do before Palpatine gets there to ultimately see the Sith plan to glory. Where does this all go? Who knows? We'll see. I have to admit that when I first watched this episode earlier tonight at around 6 o'clock when it debuted, I fell asleep twice during it. I found it to be not that engaging. I was not a fan of the pacing and many of the elements that were going on at the time. But in good conscience, I could not review this podcast having fallen asleep during it. So a couple hours later, after having the proper amount of stimulation, aka caffeine, I rewatched it, and I have to say I did like it better. But like every episode of the series, it is a mixed bag. There are things that I like, things that I didn't, things I wish they had done differently. The pacing is a little off for me. Again, I enjoyed the fight scenes. I enjoyed the confrontation moments. But one of the things I noticed on the internets tonight after the episode was the amount of people saying that this was the most emotionally impactful finale of a Disney Plus Star Wars show they've ever seen. Now, listen, I love that you love the show. I'm here for that. Is this my favorite Star Wars show? No, certainly not. But I'm glad that it's yours. But can we be honest, friends? If you're one of these ones who's saying that this was the most emotionally impactful finale, may I remind you of the season 2 finale of The Mandalorian? May I remind you of the season 1 finale of Andor? May I even remind you of the season 1 finale of Kenobi? To me, those 3 shows had far more significant emotional impact than what this episode did. Now, granted, I have admitted the storyline of the twins, not my favorite, not the most compelling, but it is what it is. I'm here for the Sithiness. Give me more of that Sithiness, and I'm here for that. Another thing I noticed of interest to me was the amount of people on the socials, big-time bloggers and podcasters and YouTubers, people with massive online presence, raving favorably about the show. Now, again, I understand I might not be the person to say this. That's not the right words I want to use. Again, I think I've done a pretty good job of being pretty fair and understanding for the show and its choices it's made. But certain podcasters and bloggers that have gone above and beyond to sort of praise the series, I find that interesting, mostly because it seems like a lot of the ones that are doing it are the ones that got to go up to Skywalker Ranch. Now, that being said, I would do the same thing. I'm not, again, I want to believe this show has integrity, but if Disney was like, hey, we're going to send you to Skywalker Ranch and you can hang out with these creators, and that'd be really cool, right? And like, you probably would look pretty favorably on our next show if we did that, wouldn't you? And I'd be like, yeah, I would. I'd be really down for that. So yeah, be a dream come true. So who am I to criticize? It just was something I noted. And again, I didn't run the numbers. I don't have any data 100% of the way to correlate, but I did think it was interesting that so many people who got to go to that Star Wars media session with Kathy Kennedy and Leslie Headland and everybody, they're the ones screaming from the rooftops about how great the show is. Just an observation, but again, I'm not. It would be hard for me to say that I would be any different had I been included in that group. Not that I ever will be, which means that I can stay here and just be honest with everybody. And again, that's all I can do is give you my opinions on things. Maybe you're one of the ones who loved the show too, and you didn't get to go to Lucas Ranch or a Skywalker Ranch either, and that's perfectly fine. As we've said on the show before, there is a slice of the Star Wars pie for every person. And if the Acolyte is the slice of pie you like best, awesome. More power to you, my friends. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I really, really am. Because, again, Star Wars is for everyone. And some of us like certain stories better than others. So for me, the episode's about a 7 buckets. The series overall is about 7 buckets. But I do look forward to potentially re-watching it down the road in 5 or 6 months and seeing if my enjoyment of it changes, as I will no longer have the burden of expectation and what I think I wanted to see out of the show in the first place. So yeah, to me it was kind of a meh finale and a kind of a okay show, but everything's subject to change, and we'll reevaluate it in a few months and see how it holds up. But yeah, I don't know. Hit me up with what you thought about the show. Hit me up what you think about this podcast. I'm at Mando_Vision, Twitter, Instagram. Email the show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share the show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. If you're able to review, sweet 5-star reviews. They help the small shows like us stand out, not get lost in the shuffle. And I'm so glad that you take the time to do that. All right, this is the Mando Vision podcast. I'm your host, Nargai Tom. And I thank you once again for being awesome members of Buckethead Nation. We'll be back next week. We might have a guest on to provide a little bit more insight and opinion on the Acolyte. We'll see how that goes. We also have in the coming weeks, we have some Mando Vision Reads episodes coming up. And of course, we will be finishing up Season 7 of Star Wars, The Clone Wars. So a lot coming up in the next few months. Stay tuned. Keep downloading. Keep streaming. Make sure you're liking and subscribing and following, all right? Okay, Bucketheads, go out there. Be great Star Wars fans. I will talk to you all next week. And remember, this podcast can only end one way. This is the way.
I suppose you'll be heading out.
I'm not.
You should.
It's against the creed. I gave you my word. I'm with you until we both fall.
You really buy into that bantha fodder?
I do.
Good.